Before there was Freddy and Jason, Michael Myers and Leatherface, even before there were classic films like Psycho or Black Christmas, there existed a multi-film universe that combined many various popular characters from the times. It was long before the Marvel Cinematic Universe and also before the failed attempt of the Dark Universe by Universal. Yes, today we are talking about the Universal classic monsters. I personally love these classic films. They hold a special place in my heart. All of these characters are so unique, so interesting, and without them, we would not have the horror films that we have to this day. So we can owe it to the classic monsters like the Frankenstein monster, the Wolfman, Dracula, Creature from the Black Lagoon, Phantom of the Opera. I could go on and on and on. These characters and films, respectively, made horror what it is. Starting back in the 1920s and going up until the end of the 1950s, the Universal monsters were the kings of horror. So today, in honor of the Universal monsters, I'm going to be ranking my top 5 of the Universal monster movies. With that being said, let's jump into number 5. Abbott and Costello meet Frankenstein. I wasn't exactly sure of where to place this one on the list, just because it is much more of a comedy movie than it is a horror film, but at the same time I can't help but enjoy this film for its entertaining elements. The basic premise is that Bud Abbott and Lou Costello are these sort of postmasters that have to make a delivery to a house of horrors. And of course, in the delivery are the remains of Dracula and the Frankenstein monster. At the same time, you have Lon Chaney Jr.'s iconic Larry Talbot, aka the Wolfman, trying to stop Dracula from resurrecting the Frankenstein monster. But of course, everything unfolds, monsters break loose, and you have hilarity with, of course, Abbott and Costello.
Flying about the countryside. Flying. Listen, you're making enough noise to wake up the dead.
I don't have to wake him up. He's up.
This film was released during the end of the 1940s era, where the Universal monster craze was kind of dying down and everything got kind of stale. So they injected some new lightheartedness into the series, and I think it paid off rather well. This is a very fun film. The comedy still holds up till this day. It's very slapstick for the time, but also very fun. And of course, you also have all of the amazing actors reprising their roles as the monsters. You have Lon Chaney Jr. as, of course, the Wolfman, Bela Lugosi as Dracula, and while Boris Karloff did not come back as the Frankenstein monster, you have Glenn Strange, who I think did a really good job with the character. Overall, this is a really fun movie, and it just goes to show that even back in the 40s, there was still kind of this idea of a shared universe, much like the Marvel Cinematic Universe we have today. Let's move on to number 4, which goes to The Bride of Frankenstein. While most people accredit the original Frankenstein film as being the one that adapts the traditional book by Mary Shelley, I personally have to say that The Bride of Frankenstein is a better movie in almost every way. I don't want to bash the first one, but if you rewatch it, it's kind of slow, and Bride of Frankenstein takes all of the good elements from the original and expands upon them. It just goes to show that yes, a sequel can be better than the original. It follows the story of the monster, yet again, played by the amazing Boris Karloff. He escapes the burnt-down windmill and goes on a terror spree. At the same time, he, along with another mad scientist, want to get Dr. Frankenstein to make a bride, to make a mate for the monster. This was expanded upon in the actual novel, but it took until the second Frankenstein film to get it brought to the big screen. And I think it was really well done, and I think it had some amazing acting, amazing cinematography, some great sound design, especially the amazing score. Many critics say that The Bride of Frankenstein is perhaps the best horror film ever made, and while I don't completely agree with that, I do think it is a fantastic film, and not only is it a great horror movie, but it also has some really good life lessons to be learned. Looking back on the film now, it's not very scary per se, but it is a great film and it incorporates many different elements that I really do enjoy. And of course, my personal favorite scene would have to be the one where the Frankenstein monster visits this blind man, and he shows him a lot of love and respect.
Ah, there is good and there is bad. Good. Bad. Good. Music.
It's very unfortunate when this man's house is raided by these villagers and they immediately disregard the Frankenstein monster and run him back into the woods. Overall, I really do enjoy The Bride of Frankenstein. It has a very nice conclusion to the Frankenstein story, at least thus far until they made Son of Frankenstein and Ghost of Frankenstein. But it is still a good movie, and I definitely recommend it. Let's move on to number 3, which goes to Dracula. Of course, the 1930s classic vampire story. Based off of the novel by Bram Stoker, it tells the tale of Count Dracula, a vampire who lives in Transylvania. After being visited by an outsider by the name of Rainfield, Rainfield becomes quickly hypnotized by the Count's power. They travel overseas in a boat, and after reaching their destination, the Count decides it's time to feed. Of course, at the same time, Van Helsing, who is a priest, needs to figure out what's going on with the whole situation involving the Count and uncovers the shocking truth that he is a vampire.
Your will is strong, Van Helsing. More Wolfbane. More effective than Wolfbane, Count. Indeed.
Of course, when you think of Dracula or any vampire, the image that probably comes to mind is Bela Lugosi's classic and iconic performance in this film. The movie is atmospheric, it's dark, it's creepy, it's claustrophobic in many regards, and it tells the tale of a classic vampire story. I love when the lore of monsters are explored in these old films, and I think Dracula is one of the best examples of how that works. Of course, this film comes together with some amazing acting, not just Dracula, but also Van Helsing. The actors behind these iconic characters do so well, and it's told in such a simple yet classic way. It really comes together in a great package. The only thing that this movie is lacking is, of course, a lot of sound. This was one of the first sound horror films after the silent era of the 20s, so there's not really a definite score throughout the movie, but there is some music here and there, and while the sound's a little bit choppy, it still holds up as a great monster movie. Let's move on to number 2, which goes to The Wolfman. There's been a lot of werewolf films over the years, but I think the iconic Wolfman film is my personal favorite. It stars, of course, Lon Chaney Jr. as Larry Talbot, a man who is torn between two worlds, trying to do what is right and this horrifying life as the Wolfman. And that drama and conflict alone makes this movie so much more interesting than a lot of the other Universal monster films. Throughout the film, he has to face a love life in his kind of relationship. He has a relationship going on with his dad, who is very rich and powerful, that he needs to work out. And at the same time, he has to battle this dog that he ends up discovering is, in fact, a werewolf. And after being bit every night when a full moon rises, when the wolfbane blooms, he turns into a werewolf and attacks innocent people. The end of this film is very iconic. The mid of this film is very iconic. The entire movie is just so classic in its horror atmosphere, its creepiness, and of course the amazing, amazing design of the Wolfman himself. The score for this film is also so incredible, and I just love how simple it is. It tells the story of a werewolf. There's been many other werewolf films, like I've said, but nothing comes close to the classic Wolfman. With that being said, and all of those other films out of the way, let's get to my number one favorite Universal Monsters film, which goes to... The Invisible Man. That's right, Claude Rains' iconic performance as Dr. Jack Griffin, aka the Invisible Man, takes my number one spot as the Universal Monsters champion. Not only is this one of my favorite Universal Monsters films, but it's also one of my favorite horror films ever made. And what's amazing is the classic story of a doctor who turns himself invisible on accident and tries to fix himself, but at the same time murders people because the medicine is messing with his brain, mixed with amazing special effects that even for the 1930s were amazing, nonetheless, many years later, this film still holds up as a great horror movie. It has many different elements, the battle between being good and being evil, turning to your family and loved ones, and instead turning to the scientific craving that Jack Griffin needs to have throughout the movie. Again, I mentioned the amazing special effects, which still hold up to this day, and I'm sure back in the 30s they were very impressive.
And now you'll suffer for it. You're crazy to know who I am, aren't you? All right, I'll show you. There's a souvenir for you. And one for you. I'll show you who I am and what I am.
Look, he's all eaten away.
How do you like that, eh?
It also has a very interesting score throughout the movie. The soundtrack is very cool. And the story is, while simple, also very compelling. And it raises many questions like, what if you were invisible? How would you walk up the stairs? How would you wear clothes? How do you eat food and let it digest inside of you while it is visible and you are invisible? I know it's very interesting to think about, and this movie raises a lot of those questions and offers a very interesting storyline throughout the movie on how the police and how the townspeople react to an invisible murderer running loose. I just love this movie. It's more entertaining and interesting than a lot of the other classic horror films, which kind of run slow. This movie keeps my attention. It's kind of a quick movie, but it's also a great one. That was my personal rankings of Universal Monster films, at least my top 5. Perhaps I'll do a bigger analysis in the future. But I want to know, what are your favorite Universal Monster films? Because remember, this list is just my opinion, and I want to hear yours. Thank you for watching, and remember as always, for all things Halloween, this is Haunt-Former.